What's your reaction to what Elise just reported about Rudy Giuliani, the former New York City mayor? Do you think he would be a good Secretary of State?
Well, I think it is worrisome, some of the ties to foreign governments, because that was a big complaint about many of us with Hillary Clinton and her ties and the money she received from foreign governments. So whether or not you have divided loyalty obviously is very important. But I think more important than that is I think Trump should pick a Secretary of State that agrees with his foreign policy. And the thing Donald Trump said over and over again was that he was opposed to the Iraq War, and he learned that lesson that regime change in the Middle East was not a good idea. And yet I don't see Giuliani coming out with statements like that. I certainly don't see John Bolton. I think both of them have been big cheerleaders for the Iraq War and for more intervention in the Middle East. So I hope Donald Trump will pick somebody consistent with what he said on the campaign trail. Iraq War was a mistake. Regime change in the Middle East is a mistake.
Because John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the UN during the Bush administration, I know you've written very, very sharp words criticizing him. You would be totally opposed. Would you go so far as not to vote to confirm him as Secretary of State if President-elect or President Trump goes ahead and nominates him?
I couldn't vote for Bolton unless he repudiated his support for the Iraq War and repudiated his support for regime change throughout the Middle East, repudiated his call for immediately bombing Iran. I mean, really, you want to have a diplomat in charge of diplomacy. You don't want a bomb thrower. And so, no, John Bolton's totally unfit to be Secretary of State. And I hope that the Trump administration will say, you know what, he does not represent what Donald Trump represents, which is change, and which is the understanding the Iraq War was a mistake, and that regime change in the Middle East has been a mistake.
And Rudy Giuliani, what about him? Would you vote to confirm him?
You know, I think it's less clear. I think Giuliani shares most of John Bolton's statements towards Iran, towards the Iraq War. I'd say it's a stiff uphill climb for me with Giuliani, because he'd have to convince me that he understands now the Iraq War was a mistake, and I've never heard anything like that coming from him. So really, I think Giuliani and Bolton are very similar. Bolton just has a more extensive cheerleading background with regard to war in the Middle East.